you came to the character like a lot of people did, especially a lot of non-Americans did. When you hear the name and hear the idea of the character and see the costume, your initial reaction is, that looks silly and ludicrous.
Yeah.
And kind of weirdly gung-ho, rah-rah patriotism, right? So what I'm interested in is like how that opinion has changed since going into the first one, like the first movie like that, and then on the back of those two, presumably you don't view him as a silly character when this movie starts up.
When this movie, you mean this current movie starts off? No, he's not a silly character for me anymore. I think he, without meaning to be a pun, he's earned his wings. He's earned his wings, Captain America, by the end of the first. You know what I mean? See what I did there?
Clap. Golf clap, everyone. Golf clap.
Yeah, now who's the muggle?
Excellent
now? No, I think, because you know my initial feelings with the first Captain America film. I thought this was going to be a tone-deaf, sort of jingoistic thing. The first film, that's what I thought it was going to be like, but no, it wasn't. They actually addressed that element of it and made it something even greater. And for me, he could have come back with the wings on his helmet, and I still would have said, it's fine. That's not silly.
Yeah,
he earned the right to do whatever he wanted after the first one.
Well, let's take a little look into the kind of a bit more of the publication side, the publication history of Captain America as we approach the Winter Soldier and get ready to press play on that big fat VHS we've got loaded into the video player. And I think it was appropriate when looking at publication things to talk about, to take a minute to appreciate Captain America's rebellious nature and to look at some of the stories that do that, because that's really what we see begin and kick off really here in the Winter Soldier, this rebellious streak of Captain America. And there's a tendency, as we chatted about in the first Captain America film, especially from non-comic book fans and especially from those of us in Europe and abroad from America, to look at the name and the costume of Captain America and make these assumptions that he is pro-America no matter what, that he's a government lapdog, a bootlick, that kind of an impression he gives off. And the comic book character could not be further from that. He repeatedly, it's emphasised that Captain America takes his inspiration directly from the rebels that founded the country and did so through acts of terrorism against the British. And Cap firmly and proudly believes that a true patriot identifies what is wrong with his country and fights against it.
Oh, yes.
It's not a complete acceptance of whatever's happening, especially by authority. Anti-authority is a big part of that, and corruption and these things play a big role in the comic books. And we see some times that Cap has really turned completely against his government, but not his country. 1978, there's a story by Steve Englehart and Sal Buscema. Cap is battling against a criminal terrorist group called the Secret Empire, who are a bit like Hydra, but they're a bit more secret somehow. And during that not terribly big story, but during that plot line, Cap finds out that the leader of the Secret Empire is actually a high-ranking government official. This guy crashes a flying saucer into the White House lawn, runs into the White House wearing another KKK-inspired hood, runs into the Oval Office, and Cap rips his hood, his mask off. Now, we, the reader, never see this guy's face. We are told he's the highest-ranking government official you can think of, right? It is strongly hinted that this guy is the president.
Yeah. That
the president is actually a terrorist working and running the Secret Empire. It is a Nixon allegory. It is all tied in with the Watergate corruption scandal that had taken place in the last couple of years. There are allusions that this person has taken the country into very dangerous, dark areas. That's a Vietnam, allegory. Allegory. So it's kind of hinting that the corrupt elements of America are to do with this kind of almost supervillain character. He then blows his brains out in the Oval Office in the White House, and the rest of the government cover up the president's not the president's death, the high-ranking government official's death, and demands that Cap goes along with it. And Captain America cannot compromise on this, so he abandons his identity. And he walks away. He gives up the costume, he gives up the name, and he leaves because he refuses to go along and be a part of that. And he then adopts a new identity, a man without a country, and he calls himself Nomad.
Yeah.
And I just now going to pop you a little sneaky peek of what Nomad looks like, and we'll put these images up. Don't forget in the blog over on Marvel, patreon.com/Marvel versus Marvel. So I'm pinging these over to you. It is have you got that? It is not at all a Marvel costume whatsoever. So Nomad has a deep V that goes... I mean, that V, that's the deepest V imaginable, right? That V goes all the way down to his belly button.
That's the V of my dreams. I wish I could get away wearing shirts like that, and I've tried, believe me, but people make fun of you.
He has no mask. Sorry, he does have a mask, but his blonde hair is showing at the top of the mask. And more importantly, he wears a cape.
Yeah.
Which is, as you know from reading Marvel Comics, is utterly, utterly not done. Aside from Thor, and even that's kind of... Thor's his own dude, his own guy. And there's also a famous scene where Cap as Nomad trips over his own cape in the middle of a fight because he's not used to wearing it.
He's ripping...
So he becomes this Nomad character rather than go along with the government's plans. And as they are wont to do, the government... I mean, he looks ridiculous, but he's standing up against the authority, and he's really taking a big stand here. The government replaced Cap with someone called Roscoe Simons, who was drafted in to be the new Captain America. That doesn't go terribly well. He is not just tortured, he is crucified by the Red Skull. He is left hanging on a crucifix, tortured to death. And the message from the Red Skull is that no one ever put on this costume ever again. Your hero was gone, and there's only me left now, and I will do this to anyone that puts that on. And that draws Steve back to the character, to the role of Captain America. But it happens several times later. I mean, in 1987, there's a story by Mark Grunwald and Tom Morgan where Captain America starts to become disillusioned with the government and with always being used with a military end in sight. So he wants to reach out to the people, and he sets up and funds something called the Captain America Hotline. Now, folks listening at home, this is before the World Wide Web. This is before social media, before personal telephones. The only way to get in touch with a lot of people were to call these call centres and these hotlines. So Cap funds his own call centre, and anyone of the public who needs help will call the Captain America hotline and speak to one of his operators. And if the situation is dire enough, Captain America will come and sort it out. Now, it's probably not plumbing issues, but that was the whole deal, is that Cap wanted to become an agent of the people rather than an agent of a military design. And the government hates it. The Marvel comic book government cannot stand that Cap is cutting them out of the picture and going direct to the people. And something that's been set up in Marvel, it's called the Commission on Superhuman Affairs. And it's this thinly veiled allegory for the House of Un-American Activities Committee, the one that operated throughout the kind of the dark times of the 50s and the 60s, and through tried to weed communism out wherever they could find it. And this commission is set up to regulate all superhuman activity. And basically the government goes to Captain America and say, the government own you. We own Captain America. Your powers, we own them. Yeah. Your costume, your name, the shield, every penny of every income you've ever drawn. We're not that happy that you claimed 20 odd years of pension when you suddenly turned up out the blue. So everything that you have is ours, and we will sue you, and they threaten him with legal action unless he shuts down the hotline and becomes a wholly government agent again. And that's too much for Cap. He quits, he hands over the mask, the costume, the shield, and walks off. And he develops, he learns his lesson from the Nomad. And what he adopts a new identity. He just simply calls himself the Captain. Firing this over to you now, Will. And it is basically a different, almost colour tone, a different take on the Captain America costume. And he has an adamantium shield instead of his classic one. And it's like a black costume with red and a little bit of white knocking on. I think it's a stunning costume. It's a really cool costume, that one. That's one of the costumes I kind of grew up reading. It's the 80s. That's when Iron Man's got this Silver Centurion armour. We've got Grey Hulk in Vegas that we talked about. Pimp Vegas Hulk. We've got black costume Spider-Man. So there's a lot of that going on in the 80s. The government once again have Captain America replaced by another agent. And this one's interesting. So they replace Captain America with someone called John Walker. Now, John Walker was originally a character called the Super Patriot. And the Super Patriot was a radical character in the 80s. Just take a moment to think about what this says back then and about what might be happening today. So the Super Patriot is a radical, right-wing, angry, aggressive, pro-US kind of character. And he holds these... He doesn't necessarily do a whole lot of being a superhero, but he holds these big right-wing rallies to get populist support. It's stated several times that his supporters are racist, but he denies having anything to do with them and says they're just fringe elements of his supporters. He's corporate sponsored. He's a superhero with corporate sponsorship. And he clashes with Captain America a number of times. That's the guy that the US government picked to become the new Captain America. That all falls apart again, and it turns out that the Commission for Superhuman Affairs is actually being influenced by the Red Skull the whole time, because that's kind of a thing that happens a lot in Cap Comics. And then what happens then is Steve Rogers becomes Captain America again, and John Walker takes that captain costume and becomes someone called the US Agent. So Captain America, Steve Rogers... No, I think it was a cool name, US Agent. US Agent. Do you get it? I'm not sure you get it, Will. Let me break it down for you again, right? It's not US Agent, it's US Agent. You have to say it like that every time. It's a clever pun that just gets cleverer every time you say it. So what we see with these kind of stories is that Captain America is not ever under the heel of the government or any authority. He knows in his heart, as we said before, he's Gary Cooper in High Noon. He knows deep in his soul what is right and what is right for the country and what is wrong, and he just acts, whether that will turn everyone in power against him or not.